It arrived as a morning envelope disguised as nothing, spoke in between royal briefings and reports. However, the weight seemed heavy with something sinister, the seal was peculiar, and the calligraphy was foreign. Kate nearly disregarded it until her intuition told her not to. It confirmed a murmur that had haunted palace walls for decades. And what she read within completely upended her existence. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any updates before we delve deeper into what this actually implies for the royal family. The envelope didn't seem important at first glance. There was no emblem, no crest, and no clue that it was carrying anything more than a routine assignment from the palace. However, Kate felt a weird chill go through her chest as she pushed her finger under the flap as though the temperature had suddenly plummeted by 10 degrees. Within one page, no palace letterhead, no formal salutation. Just a sterile sheet with strong text on it. DNA report that is confidential. Kate gasped. She froze her fingers. She took another look. Her pulse quickened. In her vision, Diana, Spencer, and another person's names were blurry on the sheet. Until now, the name was unknown and unimportant. She read again, blinked, and then read again. Each sound became as sharp as a knife. The report verified that Diana and this unidentified person were biologically related. However, how? Why? What was the test's objective? Dread crept in like a shadow down her spine, causing her thoughts to swirl. This was not conjecture. It was based on science, clinical, absolute. She became increasingly aware that she was not merely reading results as she continued to stare. She had a secret. A ghost had been buried in the palace. The crown had made an effort to keep quiet. This was more than just a bombshell to the family. It was a violation of the fundamental basis of royal ancestry, a break in the narrative they had spent decades meticulously crafting. Her hands started to tremble violently. The world she knew was shattering at the seams as she gripped the page more tightly, attempting to cling to something. Her knees buckled a little. Unable to comprehend the size of what she currently held, she staggered back onto a chair. Then the tears started to fall. First it was quiet, then more substantial. Sobs slipped between her clenched jaws, causing her body to shake. Her face was veiled, in a desperate attempt to escape the storm, tearing into her soul now. Diana's name held great significance for her, not only as a historical person but also as a lady whose shadow continued to reside within these walls. Now that shadow had taken shape, a secret, possibly a legacy, that had been abruptly torn from the past and placed in Kate's shaking hands. As she sat astonished and crushed under the weight of a revelation she couldn't unsee. The sound of her children playing in a far-off hallway added to the surrealness of the moment. However, what started off as a modest discovery quickly sparked a firestorm, drawing Kate into the center of a secret Diana carried to her grave, a secret that refused to be spoken. Diana had left a trail of breadcrumbs, letters that nobody dared to decipher, journal entries written off as paranoid, and riddles covered in melancholy phrases long before the envelope arrived. But suddenly, with Kate's revelation, every enigmatic warning was illuminated with horrifying clarity. What sounded like the emotional digressions of a besieged lady now reads like a prophecy. Kate sat motionless. She could still clearly recall the DNA report. However, she was no longer preoccupied with the clinical specifics. Diana's voice was heard, a voice that had attempted to communicate from the afterlife. It brought up memories of a solitary statement written in fragile ink on a journal page she had seen at an Althorpe exhibition years before. She will eventually find out. It had seemed poetic, even dramatic, to Kate at the moment. Now, though, it now seemed to be directed at her in particular rather than the whole audience. Handwritten notes, faded photos, journal entries hidden behind glass, and mementos of Diana's life had all been on display. Kate had been drawn to one journal in particular because of the handwriting's eager tilt. Diana's remarks had been filled with more than just anguish, urgency, desperation. A lady who uses quiet to strive to be heard. At the time, Kate didn't get it. But that recollection struck her like a tidal wave the instant it came to the surface. Diana had written of a woman beyond the royal walls in those same notebooks, someone she trusted when she had no one else to turn to. Confidential letters that were sneaked out of the firm's view and tightly sealed. The name was weak and strange, but it was clearly repeated, as Kate remembered. Whoever that confidant was, she had been trusted with more than just friendship. She had carried pieces of a reality that was too perilous to exist inside the castle. Then followed the brief yet incredibly disturbing references. They aren't related. They are machinery, Diana wrote once, chilly, mechanical. They delete rather than protect. Kate recalled dismissing it, believing that grief was reflected in Diana's remarks, of seclusion. However, the meaning of those words had changed. They weren't analogies, they were cautions. The only location Diana could talk freely was left with coded communications. Charles casually referred to Diana's works as emotional drivel in a recollection from years ago, and writing off her efforts to be remembered as sentimental manipulation. Back then, Kate had given a kind nod. Now, however, those words were laced with remorse and disdain. What if he was aware? What if she had been the last to realize, and everyone else had known all along? That twisting, aching in her chest, that nagging suspicion, would not go away. Beyond sadness, Diana had been attempting to move on. Not for her sons, but for Kate, she had been leaving a map. The lady who would inherit her position, her scrutiny, and now her unresolved conflict. With unsettling accuracy, the last puzzle piece slid into position. This wasn't a coincidence, Kate knew. It was a choreography. Diana had hoped that someone would eventually take up the cause, and she had ensured that it would be someone who was not only capable of discovering the truth, but also courageous enough to tell it. Driven by an intense need to comprehend Diana's message, Kate understood where she needed to go, into the archives that the monarchy thought would never be opened again. Secrecy surrounded Kate's journey to Diana's childhood estate. Her true intentions were unknown. Not even William. She was escorted to a place that was concealed in plain sight beneath the velvety hush of Althorp's halls. The past, unexplored, unacknowledged, and explosive, was waiting for her there. Her vacation was initially justified as a much-needed getaway from the relentless pace of London, a quiet refuge away from the spotlight. The official storyline, which only described a duchess seeking comfort at the Spencer house, was straightforward and unimpressive. However, Kate's pulse raced with determination behind closed doors. She had no intention of resting. The whispers yelled louder than ever, and she was there to face them. Following a brief conversation with a housekeeper who had worked for the Spencer family for many years, a woman with weary eyes and a devotion that transcended titles, Kate was guided through an ancient hallway that appeared to have been forgotten over time. No cameras were present, and no employees followed. A thin door stood closed at the end of the hall, its surface unmarked, its brass handle tarnished by age. The woman hesitated, her hand lingering, and then she turned the knob. The door squeaked open to reveal a tiny, chilly room that was so quiet it seemed hallowed. The far wall was lined with dust-covered, years-old stacks of boxes, but Kate's breath caught not because of the disorganized shelves or the subtle smell of wood and paper. The handwriting was the culprit. There it was, written in Diana's distinctive script, "For Catherine, when the time is right." She untied the first ribbon with shaking fingers. She discovered the unadulterated voice of a woman who was dead, but more present than ever inside the box. Letters poured out of the container, scribbled with haste rather than grace. Diana's voice was open and honest, sometimes even panicked. It sounded more like a mother's voice than a princess's, fearful and desperate. The enigma that now dominated Kate's life was revealed with each note. A side of Diana that few had ever seen, a lady doing her own research, was exposed by the letters. She was aware that something was off. Betrayal had strengthened her instincts, allowing her to unearth information that even the palace had concealed. Questions, meetings, names. The firm never let her ask them out loud. And then, pictures? Curled at the corners and faded, their meaning was unmistakable. Kate didn't recognize the man Diana was standing next to. His presence was indisputable, his posture assured, and his features elegant. In one picture, Kate was taken aback by Diana's intimate grasp on his arm. He was more than just a friend. He was more than that. He didn't fit into the official account of Diana's life, yet he showed up here like a ghost that never went away. Kate's palms were cold now as she turned to the next envelope. DNA was the only label on it, and the contents made her shiver. The results of the second test validated Diana's fears. This was not conjecture. This demonstrated that she wasn't hallucinating, that for decades the truth she had attempted to defend had remained unspoken. Implications swirled in Kate's mind. This individual had not just been concealed by the monarchy. They had concealed a whole truth that would shatter the crown's basis. Kate saw a face in the shadows that resembled a prince she believed she knew, just as the reality was starting to take shape, and a history that no one had the courage to challenge. There was no denying the similarity: the jaw's curvature, the eyes' sparkle, a face so recognizable it made her gasp. But it wasn't William or Charles. It was a man who shouldn't be there, Harry's reflection in the flesh of someone else. Kate's head whirled with familiarity and incredulity as she gazed at the picture for longer than she should have, her gaze fixed on the stranger's features. The same man was back, showing up in picture after picture, always by Diana's side, always half in the frame, half in the background. It was no accident that he was there. It was thoughtful, intimate, and consistent. It was obvious that Diana wanted someone to discover these pictures, and now Kate was unable to look away from him. The unruly dark hair and the tilt of his smile, which was more restrained than open, were uncannily recognizable from every aspect. But what really moved me were the eyes, piercing, expressive, and stubborn. Kate had seen that expression far too often, in Harry, during painful and rebellious periods. And the idea started to form, like a gloomy cloud that won't go away. Was Diana merely friends with this man? Or something far more important? Long buried beneath layers of polished royal narratives, the rumors abruptly and violently resurfaced. Once written off as a conspiracy, whispers now reverberated with horrifying clarity. A son in hiding? Harry never knew a royal sibling? Kate's throat became constricted. Not in theory, but could this man be Diana's child? However, the inquiries tore at her in silence, in actuality, in blood. Looking for background, she went back to the papers, the letters, the pictures, for responses. Instead, she discovered omission, glaring, intentional omission. Citing her official responsibilities, she asked for access to the royal archives. Redacted files, blacked out pages, erased dates, and completely missing information were what were returned. Kate turned to those who remembered, frustrated. Sources in the royal circle that are quiet. Older employees, former assistants, those who had observed Diana with cautious compassion. She was chilled by what she heard. They did not dispute his existence. They stayed away from it. It wasn't ignorance that kept them silent. Fear was the root of it. They have remained faithful for decades because of this fear. Among the conversations, one was particularly noteworthy. When shown the picture, a retired footman who now lived peacefully in the country spoke in a shaky voice. He did not give the man's name. He didn't have to. He said that they had deleted him, the same way they wiped out the others. However, he was not meant to endure the quiet. Kate felt that one sentence twist in her chest like a knife. There was no denying the patterns. This wasn't negligence, not only in the erasing but also in the plan. It was control, a deliberate, well-planned attempt to guarantee that this man, this potential heir, would never emerge from Diana's truth's ashes. And Kate realized the stakes had risen well beyond royal scandal as the weight of it pressed against her chest. This has to do with identification and ancestry. The right to be alive. Kate's resolve solidified into rage, but she was aware that she needed top-level confirmation, and there was only one man left who could provide it. When she put the proof in front of him, he didn't bat an eye. However, he did not refute it either. Kate noticed the truth in his downcast eyes and weary sigh. What he said next almost broke her. Even though Charles had known all along, she had mentally practiced the encounter numerous times, including how she would present the evidence, how she would demand answers, and how she would remain calm despite any falsehoods he attempted to tell. However, there was no conflict when she placed the documents on the table between them and stood in front of him, her voice low and shaking. No disagreement, nothing but quiet, heavy, cold, measured, and suggestive. Charles didn't even look at the DNA findings or the photos. He kept his hands clasped in his lap. His face was unreadable. When he did speak, it was not in shock or incredulity. It was with tiredness. He murmured, "You shouldn't have gone digging?" The statements were a warning rather than an accusation. A warning too late. Kate pushed forward, insisting that he examine what had been concealed in a louder voice. Diana held the letters in her hand. "The outcome is the DNA. The pictures that proved the falsehood." He did not, however, move. Then, however, there was a slight, transient change, a tightening of his jaw, a flash in his gaze. At last, the truth came out of his mouth with resignation rather than regret. "Yes," he said. "It is genuine." Kate felt as if she had been struck in the chest by the weight of those words. He acknowledged it. Diana didn't have an illusion about her secret. The palace had erased that man, but he was real. Even worse, Charles had known all along. "It was agreed," he said, echoing her gasping pause. "A deal. It had to be done after her passing." His tone of composure was more enragement than denial. A deal, like it was politics, as though it were a tactic. Demanding to know who else had signed this unholy deal, Kate's voice broke. Who else had concluded that suppressing Diana's truth was more important than her kid, her legacy, and her dignity? Charles remained still in the face of her rage. He said it was for the institution's protection. His voice sounded icy and clipped. Another scandal was too much for the monarchy to handle. "We took the necessary action." Kate lost her cool. Her voice soared in shock and pain. She said he was allowing Diana to suffer, of allowing her to die as the world called her crazy, all the while keeping the truth, the one thing that could have saved her, secretly hidden. With bitterness in her throat, she replied, "You chose the crown over her life. To keep your throne dry, you led her to drown." Charles didn't argue, though. He did not elaborate. He didn't even offer an apology. And he believed that, which was the most painful truth of all, that it had been the right decision, even now, that on the altar of monarchy, Diana's silence was an essential sacrifice. In that room, Kate could feel herself falling apart. Everything she believed to be true about sacrifice, devotion, and duty was suddenly twisted into something heartless and vicious. She was now aware of the price she had paid for maintaining the very image that had previously buried Diana. However, Kate discovered as she left Charles that the betrayal was more profound than she had ever thought, and the person who was most affected by this reality hadn't even realized it yet. He was the youngster who had vowed to keep his mother safe. He was now a man who had to decide between her legacy and the throne. He remained silent when Kate revealed the facts to him. He cried. When she gave him the envelope, there was silence in the room. Nothing was said. The only sound was the eerie buzz of silence. Kate had waited for the kids to go to sleep, until they were the only ones still awake in the palace. As she laid the papers in front of him, the identical ones that had destroyed her own world only hours before, her fingers shook. She didn't have to speak. William peered down, anticipating something sensational or political, but what he saw left him speechless. He started by looking at the top page. Furrowed brows, oblivious to what was underneath. His gaze then fell onto the names, the analogies, and the detached clinical conclusions. His expression dropped. His body fell inward. He briefly resembled a boy once more. The youngster who, in front of the world, had held his brother's hand at a funeral. The youngster who, when no one was watching, had made pledges to his mother in whispers. No. The boy's shoulders started to tremble as he gazed at the reality she had struggled so hard to escape. At first, he remained silent. Then, in a shattered murmur, I was always aware that something wasn't quite right. He was filled with memories. The late-night calls, Diana's warnings, her unpredictable terror, and the diary entries he once saw but was told to forget. He recalled her posing queries that no one wanted addressed. The family shut her down swiftly, he recalled. How quickly they put an end to her suffering. And now he knew why. With frightening rapidity, the truth came to light in front of him. The betrayal wasn't the most excruciating aspect. For Harry, it was what it signified. William thought of his brother as he sat in startled silence. Of all the years they'd been separated by distance, miscommunication, and grief. Had Harry known all along? Was this the reason he ran away from the institution as well as the identity it imposed on him? Kate saw her husband slip downward, torn between anger and despair. He went to her and confessed, his voice breaking. He remarked, I always thought the crown was a cage. However, I was unaware that it was based on this. The air was heavy with the words. William, who had been raised to defend the monarchy from birth, now had to make a decision that may destroy it, either reveal the truth and jeopardize everything, including the institution, the crown, and the delicate reputation they had worked so hard to maintain, or like his father, bury it once more. The same shame that had plagued Charles for decades still haunts father. Only the burden of a history now tainted by treachery and the memory of a mother who had pleaded to be heard remained. There was no compromise, no simple solution. Silent but unrelenting, Kate sought for his hand while crying. He wasn't pushed by her. She didn't have to. She understood that whichever route he took, the choice would rip through every aspect of him, and he would bear the wounds. But someone else had already taken action to defend her kingdom, and she would do whatever it took, while William lamented and wondered. She didn't speak louder. She didn't have to. Camilla's warning was kind, strategic, and lethal. Kate would destroy both herself and the monarchy if she revealed the truth. Kate knew Camilla had heard everything as soon as she spotted her standing in the doorway. Somehow, secrets did not stay secrets for very long in the constantly surveillant maze of palace hallways. Kate had braced herself for courtiers' wrath. Camilla wasn't here to satisfy anyone, not even the media, but not from her, not from the woman who had once portrayed herself as a reluctant stepmother and a scandal survivor. Her purpose was to remind Kate of the precise rules of the game. Camilla entered with a spooky silence, took an unwelcome seat, and folded her hands. She spoke slowly, intently honed in on each syllable. Not sincerely, but with veiled derision, she complimented Kate on her discovery. Then she revealed what Kate had been most afraid of, as though she had practiced it for years. She was aware. She had known all along. Diana had not hidden her secret in some far-off archive. Those who knew the stakes had passed it around, guarded it like a weapon, and kept quiet. Although Camilla's face remained unchanged, her message was unmistakable. Kate would bring down not only the House of Windsor but also herself if she went public and revealed the truth. "Now the world loves you," Camilla whispered. "But before you become a duchess, wait till they find out what your family did. Hold off until the media begins to inquire about your marriage, your sister, or your uncle." There was no shouting of the threats. They were muttered, as though buddies were exchanging them. That was the cruelty, the personal tone with which Camilla talked, as if this were all a question of strategy rather than ethics. She talked about how she had survived decades of disgrace, embarrassment, and mistrust. However, she said that being silent had kept her safe. She had been crowned by loyalty. The monarchy had once been on the verge of collapse due to Diana's drama, as she called it. It would never be permitted to occur again. Kate felt nauseous. She felt her fingers digging in, attempting to stabilize herself against the storm that was building behind her chest on her lap. She wanted to shout, accuse Camilla of playing queen while dancing on the ashes of a lady she assisted in erasing, and throw Camilla's words back in her face. However, she remained still, quiet, observing, hearing, taking in every danger, every perverted defense. Camilla then struck the last blow. "Catherine, you are quite astute. However, you are not immune. You won't simply lose the crown if you follow through on this. It will cost you your children's future." Without waiting for a reply, she got up and walked out of the room as silently as she had come in, leaving a chilly silence in her wake. With every syllable weighing heavily on her chest, Kate sat still. Beneath her fiery rage was something more powerful and determined. His cautions had failed, but Camilla's threats had succeeded. They served as fuel. Evidence that the object Kate was holding wasn't merely a secret. It was the greatest worry of the monarchs. Diana was enough frightened to remain silent. They planned to silence her as well. With betrayal on all sides and walls closing in, Kate made a choice that would alter the course of royal history, forever history. She acted without waiting for permission. She made no request for permission. On a chilly morning, Kate entered Kensington's gates and, with her voice and Diana's last secret in her shaking hands, broke the stillness of the monarchy. Long after William's tears had dried into quiet and Camilla's warnings had reverberated through the castle halls, the choice had been taken in the dark. There was no turning back, no more awaiting approval, no more submitting to the unseen rules of procedure. Kate was no longer behaving like a duchess. She was assuming the roles of a wife, mother, and woman. But most importantly, she was bearing witness to a reality that was too terrible to be kept hidden. No royal advisors, no handlers, just a time, a place, and a promise. She phoned the press herself, carefully and softly. The world needed to hear what she had to say. None of the journalists could have foreseen what was about to happen as they assembled, bewildered and whispering in the morning cold. However, they realized it wasn't a planned appearance as soon as Kate took the stage. It was a reckoning. She grasped the documents, the same pages that had once shattered her, and her hands trembled a little. When she finally spoke, though, her voice had a power that no royal proclamation could match. She didn't start with politeness or formality. She introduced herself as Diana. She described her as a lady who was flawed, afraid, silent, and fiercely protective rather than the sad figure the world was familiar with. Kate mentioned the patterns. The machine that devoured weakness and produced polished illusion was called the erasure. Then she told the truth, her breath faltering. The world was never aware of Diana's child, a youngster who had been concealed, buried behind layers of silence, humiliation, and secret. And she had the scientific, indisputable, damning proof in her hands. The DNA report proved the whispers weren't a myth. The Crown desperately wanted to change the past. The naked truth was delivered with the force of 1,000 silent cries. There was no prepared speech or talking point approved by the palace. The press was still. Recorders are whirring, clicking cameras. Nobody made a move. Then the explosion occurred. News outlets all across the world lighted up with breaking headlines in a matter of minutes. A royal bombshell, the hidden son of Diana. Kate Middleton has confirmed. The darkest secret of the crown was revealed. A fresh vibe in the darkness. The globe didn't simply pay attention, it shuddered. Women who recognized Diana in themselves rallied around her. Those who had long suspected and even ridiculed the plots were now compelled to face the truth. For once, the palace was perceived by the public as a place of ghostly secrets rather than an institution of grace. The crown bled instead of shining. The response inside the palace was ruthless and quick. Officials hurried. Statements were written, attorneys were called in, and backup plans were discovered. Once impenetrable, the monarchy now stood on wobbly legs. Once certain rooms now reverberated with terror. However, as everyone screamed in shock, the man Diana had been hiding from the world emerged from the shadows, prepared to reveal his truth. He stared silently for years. He moved on now, carrying the burden of truth on his shoulders and speaking Diana's name. He was composed, calm, and prepared to change the course of royal history with each utterance. The time had come. The man whom the monarchy had buried in whispers finally emerged from decades of darkness and silence. There was only a platform, a microphone, and an uncontainable truth. No velvet curtain, no royal staging. On the outskirts of a legacy he never asked to inherit, his face possessed the quiet strength of someone who had lived too long. However, Diana's voice was poised. Raw and emotional, he started with appreciation rather than accusations. A heartfelt thank you, Kate. What a whole institution had refused to do, the woman ventured to do. She was brave, he said. He referred to her as a daughter of truth. Then he uttered Diana, the name that had plagued the throne for many years, with reverence, not with stiffness, with pain, with love that had endured too long in silence. He gave no specifics. He didn't have to. His very existence was evidence. He affirmed that he was Diana's son, as everyone now knew. He had been living in exile for years, not out of shame, but out of obligation. A duty to her memory, not to the monarchy. He had no desire to be used as a weapon. He had objected to being exploited. Thus, he remained silent, allowing history to portray his mother in a tragic light while concealing the most significant aspect of her life. However, the quiet had now ended. He talked of his mother's bravery, her desperate attempt to leave a legacy for future generations. He claimed that her struggle had not been in vain since her daughter-in-law had completed the story she started, and he depicted a woman suffering in a system that was built to remove anything that didn't match its image. Then he peered ahead, the entire globe relying on his every breath. A position in the royal order was not something he demanded. He made no threats. However, the weight of his remarks caused the palace to quiver. He stated that although blood can be denied, it cannot be eliminated. A firestorm started with that one sentence. Reactions were divided like glass within the royal family. Harry and William remained silent, their deep, impenetrable quiet. Charles made no comment and stayed shut behind palace doors. Camilla was out of sight, but the world was on fire outside the walls. While some questioned the mayhem his presence caused, others referred to him as the legitimate son. There were arguments and requests. Headlines that cried out for vengeance. Even revolution and succession. But there was something else below it all. A reckoning. A time when one woman's unwavering determination to expose the truth caused history to change, not because of process or policy. One thing was clear as the palace shook and the cameras faded. In death, Diana's voice, which had been silenced in life, was finally heard. And the world will never forget because of her daughter-in-law. We appreciate you watching, and we hope to see you in the future one. Please remember to like and subscribe.